4 warships hung dead in the black, and not one of their crews was bleeding. Their hulls sat dark, weapons cold, drives silent. Around them floated a single ship that looked like it had lost a fight and won anyway, plating scarred grey, one wing bent at an angle that should have snapped it in half. Except the wing was healing. Thin lines of light crawled across the metal, closing gash after gash, the way a burn closes over on skin. On the bridge of that ship, Captain Aldrich Rayner watched the 4 dead warships drift and said nothing for a long moment. His left thumb tapped once against his thigh. Then he opened a channel. "I'm asking you as a courtesy," he said. "Stop." No answer came back. None of the 4 ships could answer. Every gun on every one of them had gone quiet at the same second, like a hand had reached across space and simply turned them off. Nobody aboard had died. Nobody aboard could move. 3 days earlier, the same ship had been the joke of an entire space station. You'll want to hear how it got here, because what happened after, the Coalition is still arguing about it. The station was called Concordance, a silver ring the size of a small moon, and it did not know how to be quiet. Ships slid in and out of its bays with mirror-bright hulls, engines humming in the same clean pitch, every surface polished to catch the light on purpose. Then the wayfarer came through the gate, and the whole bay went still for a second before the laughing started. It wasn't loud laughing. It was worse than that, the kind that didn't bother to hide itself. 3 docking crews standing shoulder to shoulder, pointing at the long grey scratches on the hull like they were counting scars on an old dog. Someone tagged an image of it rust bucket, and by the time the ship had finished docking, half the station had already seen the joke. Rayner watched the feed once, on a screen no bigger than his hand, and turned it off. "They're not wrong that it looks bad," said Voss, the ship's engineer, arms crossed at the hatch. She was human too, younger than Rayner by 20 years, with grease under her nails she never quite got out. "Want me to run a polish pass before the ambassador meeting? Won't take long." "No," Rayner said. "They're going to keep laughing. Let them." He didn't say anything else, and Voss didn't push. That was the thing about Rayner. 30 years running salvage runs and deep supply lines had taught him that the loudest room usually knew the least. He'd learned to count his words the way other men counted money. Cale met them at the airlock. Cale was the closest thing the crew had to a diplomat, a lean man with a weathered face who'd spent 6 years learning coalition law from records nobody else wanted to read. He held up a data slate like it was a shield. "Provisional observer status," Cale said. "Lowest rank they have. We get a seat at the back of the room and no vote." "Fine," said Rayner. "It's an insult." "It's a door," Rayner said. "Doors don't need to be polite." They walked the ring together, past coalition officers who didn't bother lowering their voices, past display cases holding fleet models 1,000 years old and untouched since. Rayner noted the mismatched plates on his own ship's hull image, projected on a status board near the bay, every scratch numbered like a museum piece, like his ship was already a relic before anyone had asked it a single question. The assembly hall was where the real insult waited. War Marshal Vern Vexcor stood at the center of it, 6-fingered hands braced on the podium, a scar cutting his jaw in a line so old it had gone pale. He was Krell, broad, armored, amber eyes with slit pupils that tracked Rayner's crew like a predator watching something limp. "Provisional status was a courtesy," Vexcor said, his voice a low grind that filled the whole chamber without trying. "One this council can revoke as easily as it was given. A species that arrives in a ship held together by scar tissue, and hope has nothing to teach this coalition." A murmur of agreement ran through the room. Rayner felt Voss stiffen beside him and put a hand lightly on her arm. "Not yet." The one who stopped it was Talon Vethari, tall and blue-skinned, a silver crest running down the back of her neck like a spine of its own. She held the vote in her hands and didn't cast it. "The motion is deferred," Talon said. Her voice was flat, careful, a woman weighing a decision she hadn't finished making. "Humanity retains observer status, for now." Vexcor's jaw worked once, and he said nothing more, but his eyes stayed on Rayna's ship's projection a beat too long. That night, back aboard the Wayfarer, Voss ran her palm along a scarred plate near the cargo bay and frowned. "These readings are off again," she said. "Same as Rigel's fall. The hull's flexing under nothing. No stress load, no impact, it's just moving." Rayna looked at the readout over her shoulder and didn't answer right away. He'd seen the same twitch in the metal a dozen times over 30 years and never once had an explanation for it that satisfied anyone but him. "Log it," was all he said. "Don't fix it." He didn't tell her why. He never did. 6 hours later, the alarms across Concordant Station started screaming at once, and every polished coalition ship in the bay lit its engines like the sky itself had caught fire. The alarm wasn't for the Wayfarer. It was for 6 coalition survey ships parked near a dying star at Rigel's Fall, and within minutes the whole assembly hall knew exactly how bad it was. 200 scientists, Cale said, reading the feed off a public display in the corridor outside the hall. The star's core collapsed faster than any model predicted. Gravitational shear at the boundary. Anything that enters gets torn apart before it can get close enough to help. Rayna watched the numbers scroll. 6 ships trapped inside a shrinking pocket of space, the shear zone widening by the minute. Coalition rescue cruisers already turning back one after another, with hulls buckled and crews screaming over open channels. He counted 4 failed attempts in the time it took Cale to finish reading. Voss came up beside them, wiping her hands on a rag she didn't need. "We could reach them." "We don't know that," Cale said. "I know the hull," Voss said. "I've watched it do things no metal should do for 15 years, and I stopped asking why a long time ago." Rayna. Rayna was already walking toward the assembly hall. Inside, the coalition officers were arguing in a dozen overlapping voices, the kind of noise that meant nobody was actually deciding anything. Talon stood at the center of it, her silver crest catching the light, her face doing the careful blank thing Rayna recognized from the vote she hadn't cast 3 days ago. "Another cruiser lost," an aide reported. "Hull integrity failed at the boundary. No survivors reported from that vessel." Vexcor's grinding voice cut through the noise. "Then we hold position and mourn our dead. No coalition ship survives that shear." "Request permission," Rayna said. The room went quiet enough that his voice carried without effort. "For what?" Vexcor said, not a question, a wall. "To attempt the rescue." Someone laughed, not loud, just one officer near the back who didn't bother covering it. Vexcor's mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "The Rust Bucket wants to succeed where our finest cruisers failed." "I didn't ask for your opinion," Rayna said. "I asked for permission." Talon looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the display, at the number of survey ships ticking toward 0 as the shear zone closed in, and something in her expression settled into a decision. "Granted," she said. "You have nothing to lose that we haven't already written off." Vexcor didn't argue. He didn't need to. His face said he expected this to end with one more wreck added to the count, and he looked almost pleased at the thought. You'll want to remember that look on his face. It doesn't last. The Wayfarer left the bay 11 minutes later, and every coalition sensor in range locked onto it the way you watch something you expect to fail. Approaching the boundary, Voss called from her station, voice tight but steady. "Sheer readings climbing. This is where the others turn back." "We're not turning back," Rayna said. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. His thumb tapped once against the arm of his chair, and then the Wayfarer crossed into the shear zone without slowing down at all. The ship should have come apart. Every coalition model said so. Every failed cruiser had proven it in real time. But instead of fighting the gravitational tide tearing at the hull, the plating did something the sensors on Concordant Station had no word for. It bent. It flowed, the scarred grey metal rippling like water finding the shape of a riverbed, absorbing the crushing pull instead of resisting it. "Hull integrity holding," Voss said, disbelief bleeding through the calm in her voice. It's Rayner. It's not fighting the shear. It's moving with it. Keep us moving, Rayner said. Talk me through the pods. Voss's hands flew across the controls, sweat at her temple, eyes narrowed against a wall of chaotic readings that would have driven most pilots to a stop. I've got 3 pods, 4, 6. They're scattered across half a kilometer, drifting toward the collapse point. We don't have time to make more than one pass. Then we make it count, Rayner said. Bring us through all of them. What followed wasn't clean. It wasn't the kind of rescue that looked good on a recording. It was 6 minutes of the Wayfarer twisting through debris and dying light, cargo bay doors opening and closing on pods that Voss threaded through gaps no wider than the ship's own hull, the whole vessel groaning under strain that should have killed everyone aboard twice over. One of the survivors, pulled in halfway through, turned out to be barely more than a boy, an Orathi researcher, 4 thin arms wrapped around himself, wide dark eyes fixed on the scarred bulkhead like he expected it to give way any second. He said something in a language the ship's translator caught only in fragments. My sister, still out there, she was behind me, she was right behind me. Rayner heard it over the open channel and didn't answer with words. Voss, one more pod, behind the debris field, bearing 310. That's inside the collapse boundary, Voss said. We go there, we might not get back out. Get us there. She got them there. By the time the last pod locked into the cargo bay, the star's collapse had closed the shear zone down to a fraction of what it had been when they entered, and every alarm on the Wayfarer's bridge was screaming warnings about a hull that, by every reading anyone could name, should no longer exist as a single piece of metal. It exited anyway, undamaged. 200 survivors aboard, every one of them alive. The boys' sisters' escape pod, the last thing pulled through the closing gap before the boundary sealed shut behind them for good. The assembly hall, when the Wayfarer returned to dock, did not laugh. Nobody said anything at all. Coalition scientists swarmed the ship within the hour, scanners in hand, and every single one of them came back with numbers that made no sense. The lead researcher, an Orathi woman with silver-threaded robes and hands that hadn't stopped shaking since she'd stepped off her own failed cruiser, stood in front of the hull and stared at her own readout like it had personally insulted her. This is not possible, she told Talon, loud enough for the crowd gathered nearby to hear. The drive signature matches nothing in our records. The hull material doesn't correspond to any known composite. By everything we understand about matter and stress tolerance, this ship should not even hold together. And yet, Talon said quietly, looking past her, at Rayner standing near the airlock with his hands loose at his sides, saying nothing, offering nothing, the same still expression he'd worn 3 days ago when the laughing started. Kale stepped forward into the silence, because someone needed to, and it wasn't ever going to be Rayner. You built walls 1,000 years ago, Kale said, his voice carrying across the stunned crowd. Your ancestors reached a boundary they couldn't cross, and they decided it couldn't be crossed. We never knew the wall was there, so we kept walking. Vexcor pushed through the crowd then, jaw tight, scar pulled pale across his cheek. He didn't look at the survivors being carried out on stretchers, didn't look at the 200 lives that had just been pulled out of a dying star. He looked only at the hull, at the scarred grey plating already smoothing itself where the shear zone had scraped it raw, and something in his expression curdled from contempt into something colder. Impound it, he said. No, Talon said. That ship is a weapon this coalition does not understand and cannot control. I am not asking, Ambassador. Neither am I, Talon said, and I outrank you on this station. The Wayfarer stays under human command. Vexcor's slit-pupil eyes moved once, slowly, from Talon to Rayner to the healing hull, and he said nothing more. But when he turned to leave the docking bay, his 6-fingered hand closed into a fist at his side, and the door he walked through didn't quite shut soft. Rayner watched him go and finally spoke, quiet enough that only Voss standing beside him caught it. That's not the end of it, he said. I know, Voss said. Behind them, in the cargo bay, the last surviving pod hissed open, and a young Orathi girl stumbled out into her brother's four waiting arms, both of them shaking, both of them alive, in a ship that 3 days ago the whole station had called a joke. Voss found him on the observation deck 4 hours later, staring out at Concordance Station's ring instead of sleeping. "4 ships just left the military wing's private dock," she said. "No flight plan filed. No transponders active." Rayner's thumb stopped tapping. "Vex scores." Nobody confirmed it. Nobody has to. She dropped into the seat beside him, voice low even though they were alone. Talon's asking the same question. She sent word through Kale 10 minutes ago. She can't order a search without proof, and Vexcore knows it. He's found the one gap in her authority. Then he's going to use it. "You don't sound worried." "I'm not worried," Rayner said. "I'm deciding." That was the part of him nobody on the Wayfarer had ever fully learned to read. The long, quiet stretch between a threat appearing and Rayner doing anything about it. Voss had watched it for 15 years and still couldn't tell, in the moment, whether he was patient or simply slow to anger. She suspected even he didn't always know. "The part that still keeps me up at night. It hasn't happened yet." Kale came aboard an hour later, carrying nothing but bad news and the boy from the survey ship, the four-armed Orathi researcher whose sister they'd pulled out at the last second. The boy, Cyril, his name turned out to be, once anyone thought to ask, wanted to say something in person and wouldn't say it to anyone but Rayner. "You should know," Cyril said, all four hands folding and unfolding in front of him, a nervous habit that hadn't stopped since the rescue. "The scientists who scanned your ship. They shared the readings before Talon sealed the report. Vexcore has copies. He knows your hull heals. He knows your weapons systems read as inactive on every scan his people ran." "They're not inactive," Voss said carefully. "No," Cyril agreed. "But they don't look like anything either. That's what frightens him. A thing he can name, he can fight. A thing that reads as nothing," he trailed off, four hands going still. "My people would call that the worst kind of unknown." Rayner looked at the boy for a long moment. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because you didn't have to come back for my sister's pod," Cyril said. "The model said you'd lose the ship if you did. You did it anyway." He hesitated, then added, quieter, "I don't think Vexcore understands that kind of choice. I don't think he's ever made one." After Cyril left, Kale stayed behind, arms crossed, watching Rayner the way he'd watched him for 6 years, trying, and mostly failing, to get ahead of the man's silences. "You've known this was coming since the impound demand," Kale said. "Haven't you?" "Since before that," Rayner said. He nodded toward the hull, toward the faint shimmer of scar tissue still knitting closed along one seam near the cargo bay. "Ship's been logging stress patterns for 2 days that don't match anything we've hit. Small pulses. Like something's been testing the hull from a distance, quiet, looking for a weak point." "You never told anyone." "I told Voss to log it and not fix it," Rayner said. "That was the tell. If I thought it was nothing, I'd have told her to ignore it." Kale stared at him. "You knew he'd come, and you let him find nothing to exploit." "I let the ship find out what it needed to find out," Rayner said. "There's a difference." It was as close as Rayner ever came to explaining himself, and Kale knew better than to push for more. He left to find Talon, to warn her one more time that the vote she hadn't cast 3 days ago was about to matter a great deal more than she'd planned for. The mundane hour that followed was, in its own way, the strangest part of the whole day. Voss ran a routine diagnostic she didn't need to run. Rayner ate a meal he barely tasted, sitting alone in the mess hall, thumb tapping the table in a rhythm that had nothing behind it but habit. Somewhere in the cargo bay, Cyril's sister slept in a borrowed bunk, exhausted and alive, unaware that the ship sheltering her was about to be tested in a way no coalition weapon ever had been. Then the proximity alarm sounded, soft and even, and Rayner set down his fork. "4 contacts," Voss called from the bridge, voice climbing tight. "Bearing from the military dock, weapons hot. They're not hailing us." Rayner was already moving. "Full stop on the drive. Don't give them a reason to call this self-defense against a fleeing vessel." They don't need a reason, Voss said. They're Vex scores. He reached the bridge as the four ships closed formation around the Wayfarer, dark and silent against the ring light of the station behind them, weapons ports open and glowing. On the comm, Vexcor's grinding voice came through without preamble. "Surrender the vessel," he said. "Your crew will not be harmed if you power down and allow boarding." Rayner opened the channel. "You don't have authority for this." "I have 4 warships and a council too slow to stop me," Vexcor said. "Authority is whatever survives the hour, Captain. Power down." "Stand down," Rayner said. "You don't want to do this." A pause on the line, long enough that for one breath Voss thought it might actually work. Then Vexcor's voice came back, flat and certain. "You think that ship can stop 4 of mine?" "I think you're about to find out something you can't take back," Rayner said. "Last chance. Stand down." "Fire," Vexcor said, and the black between the ships lit up white. The first volley hit the Wayfarer broadside, and for a heartbeat the whole bridge shuddered, alarms screaming across every panel, Voss thrown half out of her chair bracing against the console. Rayner didn't move from his seat. His eyes were on the hull display, where the point of impact was already beginning to shimmer, the metal folding inward around the blast instead of shattering, absorbing what should have torn the ship apart. "Hull holding," Voss said, disbelief cracking through the fear in her voice. "Rayner, it's not just holding, it's healing as fast as they're hitting it." "Keep telling me that," Rayner said quietly. "Keep telling me exactly that." Second volley struck, then a third, the warships circling now, pouring everything they had into a target that refused to break, refused to fire back, refused to do anything but sit in the dark and take it and knit itself whole again between each impact. On the station, every sensor in range locked onto the spectacle, and in the assembly hall, 100 coalition officers went silent watching a ship they'd called a joke absorb a battle fleet's full barrage without losing a single life aboard. Talon watched from the observation gallery, hands pressed flat against the rail, and beside her Kale said the only thing there was left to say. "He's not going to stop." "No," Talon said. "I don't think he is." Below them, in the dark, the Wayfarer took a 4th strike across its bow, and the light crawling through its scarred plating brightened for just a moment, not damage, not distress, but something that looked, to anyone who'd spent long enough watching it, almost like the ship was finally paying attention. The light didn't fade. It spread, a pale ring rippling outward from the Wayfarer's hull, silent, fast, passing through all 4 warships in the space of a breath. Every gun on every one of them went dark at once. Not destroyed, not damaged. Vexcor's flagship drifted dead in the water, drive cold, weapons boards flat black, and on the comm his voice came through ragged with a fury that had nowhere left to go. "What did you do to my ship?" "Nothing you can't recover from," Rayner said. "Nobody aboard is hurt. Check your own readouts before you say otherwise." Silence answered him, then confirmation, relayed through a shaking junior officer on Vexcor's own crew. No injuries, no hull breaches, just 4 warships switched off like a hand had reached across the dark and turned a key. "I'm asking you as a courtesy," Rayner said, the same words the Coalition would replay 1,000 times in the days that followed. "Stop." Vexcor had nothing left to fire. Coalition security ships reached the dead fleet within the hour, and Talon herself gave the order to bring Vexcor in, standing in the docking bay when he was marched off his own flagship in restraints, his 6-fingered hands clenched uselessly at his sides. "You have shamed us before a power we do not understand," Talon said, and it wasn't triumph in her voice. It was something closer to grief. "Take him." He didn't look at her. He looked past her, at the Wayfarer sitting dark and scarred in its bay, still knitting the last of its wounds closed, and for the first time since Rayner had met him, Vexcor's face held no contempt at all, just a kind of hollow, dawning quiet. Talon boarded the Wayfarer the next morning, alone, no aides, no guards. Voss met her at the airlock and walked her through the cargo bay where the pods still sat, through corridors lined with plating that shimmered faintly under the lights. "Show me," Talon said. Not the readings, the truth. Voss led her to the engine core, and it was Rayner, not Voss, who finally answered. 1,000 years ago, your people hit a wall, Rayner said. Physics said certain drives couldn't survive certain kinds of stress. Your scientists proved it, wrote it down, and every ship built since has been built to avoid that wall instead of test it. That wall is real, Talon said. It's in every text we have. It's real if you stop asking why, Rayner said. We didn't have your records. We didn't know we weren't supposed to try. So when we hit the same wall, out on the edge of nowhere with no coalition to tell us it was hopeless, we just kept building. Different question. That's all it ever was. Not a better mind. Not a stronger will. One different question your ancestors stopped asking a long time ago. Talon was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting against a bulkhead that pulsed faintly warm under her palm, alive in a way nothing in the Coalition's 1,000 years of engineering had ever managed. Why didn't you tell anyone sooner? Prove it. Demand the respect it deserved. Because being right isn't the same as being ready, Rayner said. We came to share this, not to win an argument. We want to show you the way past your wall so no one has to climb it alone again. He didn't say the rest, but Voss watched Talon's eyes catch on the log Rayner had kept for 2 days. Stress patterns, no explanation, log it, don't fix it. And something shifted in the ambassador's face, like she'd only just understood that the ship had been listening to itself the whole time, patient, curious, never once needing to be told what it already knew how to do. Cyril's sister, the small, quiet thought, pulled through a closing gap in a ship that never had to prove anything to anyone before it saved her. The Coalition Assembly voted 3 days later, and this time nobody laughed. Full standing, Talon announced to the chamber, and the vote passed without a single voice raised against it, not because the Coalition had suddenly grown humble, but because 200 survivors stood in the gallery to hear it, and not one of them was willing to stay silent. Vexcor was stripped of rank in a room half empty of ceremony, his armor and sash taken, his trophy vault sealed under coalition order. He wasn't exiled. Talon saw to that personally. You will study the Wayfarer's crew, she told him, under their supervision, for as long as it takes you to understand what you tried to destroy. That is your sentence. He said nothing, but 3 days later, Voss found him standing alone at the edge of Docking Bay 7, staring up at the scarred hull without a single guard beside him, and for once his amber eyes held something that wasn't pride. The Wayfarer left Concordance Station a week after that, no fanfare, no procession. Just Rayner on the bridge, thumb still against his thigh, watching the ring shrink behind them through the viewport. They're saluting, Voss said quietly, reading the formation of coalition ships gathered at the gate, silent, engines low, running lights dimmed in a gesture no one aboard had asked for. Rayner didn't answer right away. His eyes moved to the hull display instead, to the last seam near the cargo bay finally closing, the light crawling across scarred grey metal one final time. The armor glowed once more, knitting the seam smooth, and settled back into its quiet grey. No longer a wound, now a lesson. Somewhere behind them, a young Orathi girl slept safe in a borrowed bunk that had become, without anyone deciding it, simply hers. Rayner's thumb stopped tapping. He rested his hand flat against the console instead, the metal warm under his palm, steady, patient, already healed. The ring of station, lights faded to a single point of silver behind them, and then to nothing at all.